Hi and welcome. I am so excited that you guys have joined me today. I am here with Patrick Eilers, and he's a counselor to give us some advice and to talk to us today on a very sensitive subject. And I want to put a disclaimer here. If you're with kids in the car, if you're listening to the replay, we're going to be talking about some issues that are adult issues that we need to discuss. So I just want to give that to you as a heads up. What we're talking about today is some of the aftermath from sexual addiction and also from incest that happens sometimes in families. And while it's really unfortunate, it leaves scars and it leaves a lasting effect. And Patrick has a background in sexual addiction and helping people overcome these very issues. And we've asked him to join us today to help us understand how sometimes things that we don't plan on in our lives happen to us, and then we smother ourselves with stuff and it looks like clutter and hoarding in our lives. And if we can start to kind of peel away the onion and we can look at the layers beneath what's actually going on, it might actually help us either to understand others that are going through a similar situation, or maybe it will give us some insights into trauma that maybe we've never actually looked at. So please help me welcome Patrick Eilers.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate being here.
I'm really excited that you've joined us. This is a long overdue topic, and this is the year that we have been having really honest conversations with ourselves. And a lot of people join us on this channel because they have family members that have gone through issues and they don't know how to help them. And so they're taking the knowledge that they have and they're trying to do the best they can to help other people. And if we understood a little bit more at maybe a deeper level, it might put us in a better situation either to get help ourselves or to help those family members that have been struggling with these lifelong trauma issues.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's something that's very, very common, and people don't really, I think as a culture, we don't really recognize how common it is and how prevalent it is in our, certainly in our Western culture, but probably across the world. It's something that's affecting a lot of people in many ways.
Tell us a little bit about when you, what you do in your practice and kind of the types of people that you help, because I know at the end, I'm going to ask if you will share with us where our listeners can go to find you personally, because you have a bunch of experience that many of us don't have. And so this is a really specific niche that I know can really help a lot of people.
Absolutely. So I work for a practice. We're located in Novi, Michigan. So we're a suburb of Detroit, Michigan. The practice's name is NorthPoint Professional Counseling. And so we work commonly with people who are typically struggling with sexual addiction. That's kind of our main specialty. We also have a specialty as well in the area of what we call partner trauma. So it's common for folks, especially if they are in a marriage or in a primary relationship with their partner, and whether there be an affair, whether there be some pornography use, anything that kind of can breach that covenant, so to speak, of a relationship together. When that happens, a lot of times a partner will start to experience similar to PTSD symptomology or PTSD itself. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times partners will experience that. And a lot of times you'll see partners will tell the addict or the person who's struggling with compulsive behavior to say, okay, we'll go get help and go see counseling, go work with Patrick, so to speak. And then, but I'll be okay. And so typically that doesn't usually happen. Typically that means that the relationship will suffer because the partner is also struggling. So this is kind of a relational, entirely encapsulating thing as far as folks and their symptoms when that typically happens for folks. And when it does, we always try to encourage folks that this is relational. You want to work on the relationship with this specifically in mind, because we see it on both ends. So that's a little bit about kind of us. My practice. I mean, I've been a general practitioner as well. So I've worked in the field for almost 8 years now. I started in 2016, and for a long time I worked as a pretty much kind of a general practitioner range. So I worked, mostly with every kind of diagnosis in most ages. So I think my youngest client was 5, oldest, so that was 62, my first practice I worked at. So I kind of have a lot of experience in different age groups. But then when I had an opportunity to come here at NorthPoint in 2020 to kind of really specialize in the sex addiction piece, it's been a real learning experience. I've learned a lot as far as for myself, but also being able to help folks that are struggling with this behavior. And so another way you can think about it is, compulsive sexual behavior that can look a lot of different ways. It can be pornography, can be one end of it, so to speak, if we talk about it, kind of a continuum of behavior. all the way till, compulsive affairs. And I think one of the things that typically comes up a lot of times when we're talking about, culturally with sex addiction, I just want to kind of put this out there, is that it doesn't always mean that there's some type of what we call pedophilia involved. Sex addiction does not always, mean that there's a correlation there, meaning that there are people who can struggle with pedophilia, but doesn't mean they're an addict, and vice versa. So that's something I wanted to put out there because I feel like that's something that comes up a lot, and we can kind of feel like that's part of one of the kind of cultural taboo pieces of this particular topic that makes it very difficult to talk about.
Well, and I think taboo is the key. That's a key word. And many people have a preconceived notion of what a sex addiction is and how it might affect our lives. You mentioned something that caught my attention a moment earlier when you said age ranges. Is there a particular age range that sex addiction falls in, or is it across the board?
It can be any age. Typically, we see what we call an early exposure. This means it could be an exposure to pornography, could be an exposure to some type, like you mentioned before, some type of an abuse scenario or something like that. Could be a very early sexual experience for someone that again could be consensual, but could be very early on in their life. And typically we see the age ranges nowadays somewhere between 5 and 8 years old being kind of your first exposure. So again, I'm kind of just leaning toward it's more common to see this with pornography now. People get it on the computer. You're able to see pretty much anything and everything, if you want to search it out. And so these early exposures are happening in a younger and younger period because of the access to the internet. And then the curiosity kind of sets in as we get older and we go through puberty. You start to, wanting to know more about things. And so the more you look at these things, the more you kind of saturate your mind with that. The brain is altered by when you have those experiences. And so some people can struggle with it for 45 years, and they may be 70, 80 years old and they're still struggling with it. But it's just kind of become a way of their life. That's kind of just what they expect. That's their norm. So there's some things I guess I would consider. Age range is really. It could be any age range. This can be people can be affected by it.
Well, and I appreciate knowing that, because I know that in our culture in the last couple of years with the Me Too movement, it started becoming okay for people to come out and say, wait a second, something happened here and there was an issue and I was a part of it. And I understand that just because it happened, I'm not a broken person. There's still a purpose for me to live, and there is an other side to that. Like you can go through it to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Share with us, if you will, about some of the symptoms that some people may want to look for either in themselves or in a family member in order for them to maybe seek out a company like yours to get some help.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we look for about what I call about 10 symptomologies, so to speak, for folks. And they can vary. Like, again, everybody might not have every one of these ones, but and I won't go through all 10 of them. But, one of the ones we would look for is isolation is a pretty big one. Do I isolate a lot from people to the degree that, I really, I'm highly focused on something sexual, or this could be with any kind of addiction, but certainly am I, if we're talking about sex specifically, am I spending a lot of time abnormally looking at pornography or engaging in sexual thought? Really, how much is and I struggle with the word obsession, but that's the word we use, is that, it's an obsession about, sex. So am I, lusting, or am I sort of taking captive of the people around me? Again, from a male perspective, that's something, it's kind of expected. So it's hard for people to see that as something as, oh, this is a problem. It's really affecting my life. Another thing we typically look for is that they've, somebody who's made efforts to stop and they've been unsuccessful. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're in college and you watch a lot of pornography when you're single, but then you get married. And so you decide, I'm not going to watch this because my wife doesn't like it and I don't want to do it anymore. But you just can't seem to stop. It's just it's compulsive. You're drawn to it, that kind of thing. So that would be another symptomology you might look for. Another one that you might, it's sometimes a little bit more, a little harder to necessarily see sometimes, is the absence of sex, kind of the other side of it, sex aversion, as we call it. Then that side is, avoiding sex. So basically, the other side of the extreme is trying to control it to the point that you just don't engage. And so what happens is people actually will become focused on trying to get away from it rather than engaging in it. So, and you'll see this can happen in relationships too, right? I can be really, really close with my wife and have a great emotional and physical, or great emotional, intellectual relationship with her. but I have no interest in having sex with her. So it's kind of an aversion in that way. And those can look similar. They can look different. Just depends kind of, like you'll hear me say this a lot. There's a lot of case by case situations. And so it's hard to always necessarily have a broad brush for a lot of these specific symptoms.
So when someone is, and I want to get to the root of this, because what we're seeing from the clutter and the hoarding end of it is we're seeing people that have gone through certain issues, and maybe they have some or all of these symptoms. And then what happens is there's a shame that's involved, and not knowing how to deal with the shame or how to address that, and not knowing what the next steps are, they kind of like smother themselves with stuff, like the stuff makes me safe, kind of a thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, shame-based illness for sure. I mean, that's the biggest thing. We talk a lot about shame. It comes up in almost every conversation, if not every conversation that I've had, as far as regarding where this is coming from, why people don't want to address it, because it's something that I feel very shameful that this has happened. And some people talk about the clutter piece of it. Going to the idea of hoarding, or going to the idea of kind of engaging with things that make me connected to the past, or maybe connected to to make me feel safe in the current. I do think that that's certainly a big part of why people may not, again, if you're using those things to keep you safe, then you're not going to be able to open up and really start to heal, because you have this kind of cocoon of things around you that keep you safe. So I definitely feel like that's part of people's experiences as well. It's probably less talked about in that sense, because it's not usually maybe as obvious, but certainly something that people experience.
So if somebody was suffering from either themselves or a family member that has sex addiction, and they are not able to, I don't know, maybe get the help that they need, and they are in the cocoon, what are some of the first steps that they would take in order to not just have an honest conversation with themselves, but maybe actually go to get some help?
Yeah, I think the first thing would be, if you're kind of surrounding yourself and you see this again, surrounding isolation, who are the first people in your life that that you may feel safe with, or that you could work toward building that bridge, so to speak, with someone. Therapists are in that position from a objective perspective, but a lot of people, even just again, there's an apprehension to do therapy, especially if I haven't really wanted to open up and tell all these things to someone. So I think, what kind of small steps can you start to make relationally with folks, in the sense that okay, yes, I can talk to my friend here, maybe not about what I'm dealing with in the depths of it, but being able to kind of start to open up a little more about how my day was, or if you're married or in a relationship, I start talking with my significant other about a little more specifics. The way I think about it is, from an intimacy perspective, we got to bring our fences down. And I kind of go back to my analogy I use with the guys I work with is, home improvement. There's Tim Allen's neighbor had the really high fence up. I forget, his name's Wilson, I think, is his neighbor. You could only see his eyes, and so the comedic humor was that he was this guy who was this mysterious guy behind the fence. But there's a lot of people who are emotionally living that. They live that out every day. Right there, they have this fence up, and they're only willing to show that much of themselves. And so when people enter relationships, even if it's intimate relationships, that fence doesn't come down. And so a spouse or a partner, or even a friend or anybody, might come and knock on the fence and say, "Hey, I want to know what's going on. I care about you. I want to see who you really are. I want to know who. I want to care about you from where I'm at." And the person's like, "No, it's good. I'm good with this fence being up." And so that is it's a hindrance. It makes a hindrance for to connect with people in an intimate way, because I have this barrier between me and whoever it is I'm interacting with.
So what happens if somebody is the person behind the fence, and they're really just terrified that if other people get to know them, they're not going to love them, or not going to accept them? Or what happens if you put yourself in a vulnerable situation, and then you find out that maybe you're not accepted like you hoped you would be?
But and that is a risk. There's always the risk of, as human beings, there's always a risk that we will potentially be hurt. That's not an easy thing for anyone, even for people who may not be struggling with these types of things. I think ultimately it kind of comes down to two pieces. The one part I'd say, do I believe, is my belief now that all human beings are going to hurt me, or all people are going to harm me, or was it this particular person that had hurt me? Do I look at the person or the situation or circumstance more objectively in that way, that, this is someone specifically who's harmed me. It's not all humanity in that way. And that can be challenging because our emotions may tell us, or there may be things that we experience that say, everybody's dangerous. And that, that's part of our experience. We all, emotions are not facts, but they sometimes feel like they are. And so we kind of have to be in that position where, okay, like, can I objectively be that this may not be necessarily isolated, but it is one person. It's not everybody I'm going to interact with. I think the other part when you're talking about bringing the fence down is that, do I believe that I'm worthy? One of the things we talk a lot about in our recovery program we have here at NorthPoint is the belief that I'm worthy. A lot of people don't think they're worthy. If you don't feel you're worthy to be loved, then there's a really high chance, really high probability that you're probably going to keep the fence up. There, even if I wanted to put it down, if I believe I'm not worthy, then I'm going to leave it up. And so I think those are kind of two of the big pieces when it starts to, kind of, we're talking about kind of bringing the fence down or kind of decluttering my cocoon, so to speak, and moving toward connecting with people.
I want to stop for just a second, and I want to say hi to everybody that's joining us on today's call. And for those of you that are watching the replay as well, thank you for joining us. This is a really tough situation, but I want to hang on something that Patrick just said about being worthy. And I want to encourage you to start thinking of yourself as being worthy. You are worthy. The fact that you're alive and you're here on planet Earth, you've got a mission to fulfill, and you are worthy. You're worthy of love. Every single person on this planet is worthy of love. And I really want to highlight the fact that sometimes it's easy for us to be our own worst critic. And it's easy to get tripped up in our own head and play old broken tapes where maybe there was even a parent or a grandparent or a teacher or somebody that maybe made fun of us or said we were no good. It takes me back to a moment where I grew up with a girl that lived in my neighborhood. And I won't use her name, but she was an amazing person. And she was sexually molested as a kid. And every time we went to her parents' house, and I went over to her house so she could get clothes and stuff because she lived with us for a long period of time. But every time we would go to her house to get clothes, her parents would throw beer bottles at our heads and they would say, "Oh, you kids are stupid." And they would say mean things to us. And they would literally run us off the property. They were really violently mean to us. And that was the upbringing for her. And I didn't understand what she was going through. But what I did know is this: she's safe at my house. At my house, she's safe. And I want her to be safe. And I felt really bad every time we went to her house. I hated going to her house because her parents were so mean to us. And I can only imagine that there were situations there that made them act out. I don't know what it was, but I knew that my friend could not get away from there quick enough. It was just a really sad, traumatic situation. And sometimes growing up then, we think, and I don't know what the different scenarios are. I know everybody has a little bit different situation. But what's really interesting is sometimes we get stuck in a pattern of repeating things that people who meant something to us said to us. We repeat it over and over and over again as if it was true, and it's not true. Sometimes we hear things that are not true at all. And we are the ones that have the freedom, like Patrick said, to get some help and to speak to someone that can maybe give us a different perspective. So I really appreciate him sharing that with us. But I do want you guys to know you are worthy. So Patrick, share with us, if you will, if there's a family member who has that wall up and all we see are their eyes, how do you approach a person that's hiding and invite them to come out?
Takes time, consistent time, and consistency and time, both in that way. It seems like one of the things that happens a lot, kind of like we were just talking about the belief system. And so one of the things that people, and you mentioned, Angela, I think that was a really good point, is that what loop or what tape or what self-talk are we telling ourselves all the time? And that plays a huge role in how we're going to see the world. And that's again, going back to belief system to some degree, but certainly the idea, kind of your question was, how do we help this person that's a family member, a person that might be suffering right now or struggling? I think part of it is, are we extending ourselves to be empathetic in that way? Are we allowing whatever their experience was to be their experience? And I'm not trying to change it or tell them that they're wrong or what their experience was incorrect or whatever the case may be. Am I still willing to extend myself in that space? Because I think one of the things that comes up a lot for folks when they're behind that fence is they think that they're the only person that has had this. They're the only person that's gone through this. They're the only person that is hurting the way that they're hurting. They're the only person that's been bullied. They're the only person that's been molested. They're the only person that's been, you fill in the blank. And when that happens for a lot of folks, when they're in that space, that can lead to a lot of, like, just the way you see the world is very, very, it's changed a lot. Basically, it's essentially, it's altered in ways that most of us don't see it that way. And so what ends up happening is that changes a lot of the way that they think. And so their thought process is, I have to, stay safe, whatever that looks like emotionally, specifically. And so they may take, they may hoard, they may use pornography, they may act out in other ways, they may do other unhealthy behaviors, they may eat unhealthily. Those, there's a lot of different options they may use to try to keep that pain sort of at bay. And so as a friend or as a family member that's there, how are you allowing that person to have that safe space? How are you creating that for them? Because that safe space is going to be what's going to help them to feel safe. That's, just like any relationship, we want to be safe. And so, as human beings, we do kind of sort of cling to that comfort in what we know, even if it's unhealthy for us. So we have to, even things that are new, that in the sense of safety, like, that might be something that's very difficult for this person to experience. So how am I, as a family member, friend, having that safe space for them?
When we talk about safe space, you mentioned earlier, it might be a spouse that's going through the addiction, for example. If you were in a situation where maybe it was your spouse, and you said, and it's not just the one spouse, it's usually both people are suffering the effects of that. How would you approach the situation so that you could help your spouse get some help, but also help yourself in the process?
Yeah, the number one thing, I think, if you're struggling, what are you doing to address it on your end? So again, go back to, if you're struggling with the compulsive behavior, what are you getting help? Are you addressing therapy? In some cases, are you going into recovery? There's some cases you may need to do that, depending on again, individual cases. There's, recovery is much more of a helpful option than not doing recovery kind of work in that sense. Now, if you're a spouse, I think part of it is that, it's especially if your spouse has been betrayed, that's a little bit harder. And again, I'm not a partner trauma specialist, so I don't have that part of the training, and I don't have that part of the insight. But I could say, just from what I know from conversations I have, is that a lot of spouses, they want to not be de-elevated. And what I mean by that is that, everything else has taken the precedence over them, usually, in most of the cases, where, whether it be porn, an affair, other things in your life, whatever it might be, that person has taken, they've gone way down the notches of priority. They're not that important. They're now the person who's struggling with compulsive behavior, they may say in their heart, yes, this person I love very much, but they don't know how to show it. Again, if the fence is up, I'm not going to know how to do that. So part of it is that, so as a spouse, can I be open to the idea that I don't understand what my spouse is going through, and so I need to learn about me in order to be able to help be present for them, even though they have done a lot of things to hurt me and wound me. So, it's a very sensitive issue in that sense, because I do think it's something where a lot of partners are very angry about that, because they haven't been prioritized in various different ways. So, I want to be respectful on both sides of that, but I think it is part of that space of, okay, are you willing to say, I see my spouse is struggling. There's something that I never realized that they're going through. I need to learn about myself in order to be able to be supportive of them.
Wow, that is really deep. And I can't imagine easy, but wow, I can understand how that could be really beneficial. So my
Not easy
next
to do.
question,
Not easy to do.
so my question is then, is the getting help and maybe seeking the guidance of a therapist, does that or the forgiveness for your partner or your spouse come first?
I would lean to the idea that you're probably going to have to educate yourself and to know a little more about what that is and work on that piece first. Forgiveness is something that doesn't happen one time for anybody, right? So if you forgive somebody, you have to continuously, in most cases, you have to consistently forgive them. There's going to be times where the person, if let's say that your partner's been betrayed, your spouse is probably going to have some times they're going to slip, they're going to relapse, they're going to return to that behavior, especially if they've done it for a long time. And that's not justifying it, but that is saying that it's just what we know is reality. But on the other side of that, I would say that as a spouse, that forgiveness is not easy. And so the biggest part of, I think, of forgiveness is not only am I willing to forgive them and say, okay, you know what, I can move forward in this relationship if you so choose to do that. But also, are you looking and seeing the fruits of that person working and changing? And that's not an easy thing to always see either, because you're kind of programmed at that point to notice the things that are mysterious or weird or out of character or whatever. Like, you're kind of playing detective. You know what the things are that potentially are showing lying. Now, that person, sometimes they may, sometimes they may not, depends on the circumstance. But if they are continuing to lie, then yes, then how do you continue to work together in that sense? And you may say, hey, this isn't going to work for me. I need to move forward. I need to be out of this relationship. You can choose to do that. But I think on the other side of that, though, is that, understanding if addiction is compulsive, if a person's not working on continuing to break that compulsivity and find ways to heal, then, again, the person has to make that decision. But the forgiveness piece is, I think, an ongoing process, when you're in that, as you're educating yourself about what you're learning about yourself and your spouse.
Can you talk to us for a little bit about people that maybe don't understand the concept of forgiveness, and maybe they don't, or they have a block against going to see a therapist, and what the avoidance can do to your mental well-being?
Okay, so there's a lot of questions there. So I'll start with the first one, is the forgiveness piece. So forgiveness, at least in my experience and kind of my perspective of forgiveness, is like, a lot of times we believe forgiveness is kind of a one-time thing. Somebody's wronged me, somebody's hurt me, I'm going to say, they're sorry, I'm going to forgive and forget. Problem is, it's the forgetting part. We're not going to forget, especially if we're really wounded. Somebody who's close to us, it could be a partner, could be a parent, could be a sibling, it could be a really good friend, whoever it might be. Am I willing to say that I'm allowing that pain to still exist in myself, meaning that I can still understand that I've been hurt, but I'm also willing to say, despite that pain, I'm going to continue to work and having this relationship with you. And so in spite of that, I want to heal. So that's a process I have to do. And it's not up to what they do. It's more about, how am I going to take and understand my pain in that way. And so I think what sometimes happens when people try to forgive and forget, it turns into forgive and resent, because they're not really thinking about how they let it go. They're thinking about, what that person did, and they're just trying to put it out of their mind. If we don't wrestle with the things that people have done to harm us, we're probably going to just be resentful. And I bring that up because I see it a lot in that dynamic back and forth between the partner and the spouse. The partner, the person going through the addiction, they feel resentful toward the partner, and then vice versa, and they can't do anything right. And so it's this kind of ongoing process of, understanding, hey, resentment is going to come up. It's corrosive, though. It's something that's going to end up hurting you in the long run. So how do you, in a lot of ways, can you say, okay, I forgive this person, but I also recognize I'm probably going to get hurt again? Not saying that I can choose to put myself in that position, but I'm not also going to forget it to the point where now I'm just focusing on that wound that they caused. And so it's a process of kind of every day letting it go. Okay, this person hurt me, I'm going to set it aside, despite the fact that the way I feel, or maybe even the way that it has kept me from, being in a relationship with that person, if it's something that's, depending on the circumstance. So that's kind of question one. So that's the first part. I apologize. I forget your other two questions you had for me, so I'm sorry. You have to remind me.
So the other question is, if we are avoiding the actual issues of going and seeking help and speaking to a therapist or a counselor, what are the emotional effects, and how does that affect our emotional well-being?
Absolutely. So we kind of touched a little bit on it earlier. I would say that the biggest thing is, what do I think about, and how does that affect my worldview of the people around me and the people that are in society, so to speak. Like, if I allow this pain to continue and I just let resentment creep in, I'm probably not going to see people in the light that they are. I'm not going to see them in the light of, hey, this person is who they are. Or I'm going to kind of look at with the shade of everybody's sort of they're all out to get me, they're all out to hurt me, that kind of thing. And so it kind of takes me out of reality in that sense, because I'm not really focusing on, in these individuals as people. It's kind of everybody has a broad brush of this particular thing I might be going through. Worldviews are, and when I use that term, I mean like just how we see everybody and how we see the world. So it's not only just our experiences that can, kind of play a role in those, but it's also our, the hurts and the wounds and things we're going through. So there is an aspect where if I don't deal with those things that are hurting me, I think that, in that way, it could definitely affect how we see other people. And then the other part that goes with that is it also affects how we are going to see ourselves. Am I going to affect that? I'm going to get back to, am I worthy? Am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of care, of concern? Am I important? If I have a lot of wounds and a lot of, hurts from other people, and that's my perspective, I'm not going to think I'm very worthy of it. I'm going to continue to probably believe that. So I think it's kind of twofold. How do I see other people, and how do I see myself? I think those are definitely a couple of the big effects of that.
Is it possible that somebody can work through issues of the emotional frustration and isolation and work through that and find healing?
Absolutely, yeah, and we see it. So in a case of like sex addiction, again, there's a lot of different options for people to be able to. And I say a lot of different, is there's a lot of different programs. There are like 12-step groups out there for people to call like an SA, like an AA type of group. There's a group like we have, outpatient type of recovery programs. There are inpatient recovery programs, again, depending on kind of where people are at in their story. But I do think, and this would even go from kind of going extension to your question, is that, across the board with therapy can allow you to see yourself. I think about it in a mirror. Are you looking at yourself and looking at what you can do differently and how you play a role in some of these things, and what can you do to change your perspective? Now, that's not always easy, because a lot of people, I think, have the perspective that therapy is about, I'll use the word enlightenment. So you come in with the idea that the therapist is going to have something different than what I already thought of, which, I don't know, my experience, I would say like 95% of the time, people probably already thought about what I'm going to probably suggest anyway. So it's not going to be some enlightenment in that sense, but it might be how to handle a little differently, how to approach a little differently. What are some tools you can use to be more, more proactive in that way, so that you're not getting stuck in, so like you said, the emotional sort of turmoil of everything that's kind of going on around you. So I think there's a big part of that therapy plays a role in your own self-discovery. And how willing are you able to do that? And that's not something that's easy to do. That's a hard job. I think I kind of put it also in the perspective of like a personal trainer. If you're a personal trainer, the personal trainer is going to train you hard. They're going to make you do things you don't want to do. They're going to make your life miserable when you want to go in there to some degree. And therapy can be kind of like that. And I say that not to scare people from therapy, but I say that because that's part of what therapy is designed to do. It's designed for you to learn about yourself. It's not necessarily designed to give different perspectives, in the sense that, there's all these things different you can do. Sometimes there's some suggestions you can make and things that are good tools to have, but there's also a lot of stuff where, the belief is that, people come in knowing what they need to do. They just need support in order to do it. And that's really where I think a lot of therapy comes into play for folks.
And I think that's a key distinction, because sometimes we go to the doctor knowing that the doctor is going to tell us to eat right and exercise and such. And then the doctor says, oh, you need to eat right and exercise and such. Man, I knew that. But because a doctor said it, now it holds more credibility than just the thoughts in our head. And I think that's really important, because sometimes if we are playing a broken tape over and over again, I think sometimes we don't trust our own thoughts. And going and talking to somebody that has the degree and they've been through the schooling and they have the experience working with lots of different families through some of these same issues, then they are like, oh yes, here it's coming from a counselor that has the experience. I am on track. This is the right thing for me to do. And like you said, a therapist or a counselor can support that person in finding the best version of themselves, even though maybe they didn't think they were worthy, or maybe they weren't sure if they were on the right path. So I love that you said that.
Absolutely. That's another way of looking at it, is it's a road trip. You're the person, the client's coming in, or, whoever you want to, in that sense, they're coming in, they're going to drive the car. I'm in the passenger seat. And so they're taking us where we want to go. I just point out the stuff that's interesting along the way. And maybe it might be helpful for us to stop and take a look at those areas. And so that's part of another way of looking at it too, is that the road trip is the journey that and again, therapy is never, there might be periods where you might stop therapy, or you say, hey, I'm going to kind of try to do these sort of, navigate things on my own for a while, and that's okay. But, therapy is a journey for everyone, and to some degree, everyone's sort of on that same journey. We're all in a journey of self-discovery. It's just, part of the therapy is having somebody walk alongside with you, or drive alongside with you, if you're using my analogy.
Well, there's an era, and I don't want to poke fingers at any era, but there's an era that was very closed-mouthed about getting the help that they needed. They were very closed-mouthed about talking about sexual addictions, or if there was incest or there was pornography or something like that happened in their home. They just didn't talk about it at all, as if we ignore it, it will go away.
Mhm.
And I think the Me Too movement really woke a lot of people up. I know that even on Netflix, we started seeing different documentaries, like the Jeffrey Epstein documentary that came out. That even I had several conversations with people that were like, "Oh my goodness, I never even knew this was going on." And you're like, well, yeah, there's this whole undercurrent that's happened that we need to, number one, address, and then be aware that it's very possible that there are people in our lives, directly in our lives, that have been affected by this kind of behavior. And
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
share with us, if you will, about some of the relationship relation. What am I saying? The relation between the clutter that we have in our homes and some of those barriers that we've put up to try to isolate ourselves from the truth.
Yeah, so I think when I initially thought about when we were talking before about this question, the why I kind of the official or the first thing I guess I thought of really was that when we have physical things around us. So let's just say environment, for example. So we have clutter in our house, we have dishes that aren't done, we have laundry that's not done. Those are all kind of preemptive stressors, so to speak, right? They're going to be things that are going to create stress for us. And if especially if addiction or our addiction is related to stress, in a lot of cases most are, as far as being able to kind of be a, we'll call it a trigger, even though it's kind of an overused word, stimulus in that way of that particular those types of behaviors. If we have those things being stimuluses or stimuli of our environment, if we don't keep those things in order, it's just going to continue to kind of perpetuate itself. So what we typically see is, like, when you act out, like, so for example, if you watch pornography, let's say you watch pornography um, in the bathroom, as an example, right? People take their phone in the bathroom, that kind of stuff is pretty common. If you watch pornography in the bathroom, eventually that's going to be a correlation. Your brain's going to say, hey, it's time to go to the bathroom, time to watch some porn. So it makes this correlation connection. So where does that got to do with the space around us is that if our space is cluttered and disorganized and not put together and organized and not helping us to kind of help navigate, that's extra stress that adds to us. And if stress is one of those things that kind of kicks off that behavior or makes us feel overwhelmed, and so we want to escape it and want to go act out, that is one of those things. So we do a lot of times work with folks and trying to identify, like, in your physical life, or how are you eating, in your environment, in your car, in your household, the things organized at work, or your emails piling up, or you're kind of doing more of the preemptive type stress. So if you can eliminate some of those things, that can help to lower that. And then that gives you an idea of being able to look at some of the other areas where it's maybe more emotional, where some of those relate, either relational or maybe things that happened in the past might be more stimuli for that the behavior to continue. So again, there is a correlation for sure, because again, if our environment is in chaos, likely that we're going to feel like we're in chaos too.
Earlier, you talked about kids that have been bullied, and I say kids. It could be adults. It could be college kids that have gone through a hazing process, and sometimes it's sexual in nature, and sometimes it's not. But it ends up making people feel like I need to raise those walls to protect myself. What advice would you give to people that are going through something like that, and maybe they're wanting behaviors from the outside, meaning peers, to stop their behavior? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think we kind of talked a little bit about earlier, in the sense that not everybody's going to respond that way. But I think when you're younger, especially when you're in school, either be K through 12 or you're in college even, that's a harder place to be. It's hard to believe that people are going to respond differently, and so you kind of take on a lot of that ownership, I think, of that. I think the first part I would say is, are you talking about it with the people who are sort of in charge? And that's kind of that's a tough place to be sometimes, because again, even there's a limitation to what teachers and parents and those kind of things can do to help that, especially if it's age dependent. I think part of that is when you do isolate, or that potentially has to isolate from people when that does happen. If there's a lot of bullying, are you connecting with the people who do support you? Are you spending time with the people who do care about you and are connected with you more than maybe that you would be, just rather than kind of isolating from everybody? That's hard to do, especially if you have a lot of experiences with bullies. You can believe a lot of those belief systems. I know my own personal story. That's been something when I was a kid, same kind of thing. Got bullied a lot, and I for a long time believed stuff that wasn't true about me. So that's part of where I think you have to challenge those thoughts, challenge some of those beliefs, and kind of put yourself in a position where, okay, like, people over here, they like me, they care about me, they enjoy me being around me. Let me build on those relationships and make sure I'm not spending too much time allowing those other relationships in my life to, or even acquaintances in that sense, to define who I am and what I'm going to be.
So if you are an isolator, I'm going to just use that as a term, and you are the one that has been blocking out people coming into your space, what are some first steps that you would take in order to say, I am worthy, I do deserve love, and I do deserve friendships and social interaction with other people? What are some first steps that you would recommend somebody take to, I don't know, maybe lower that wall just a little tiny bit?
Yeah. I think the first thing comes to mind is, awareness is huge. And this has been something I feel like throughout the process that I've learned specifically about sex addiction is that, awareness really makes a huge impact as far as what, are you aware of those negative self-talks? Typically people want to have some, we're wired to be connecting with people. That's just how we are. So we look for relationships, look for connections. If we don't have that, we're going to try to meet that need. Here's another reason why acting out happens, because people try to meet their own needs in that way rather than having it, dependent on other people. So part of that, first, I think if you are isolated, the first thing you can do is start to take awareness or take an inventory of what are your thoughts, what's your thought life look like as far as about yourself. If you were to take an inventory of you, if you were to say, okay, here's all the list of things that are good about me, here's all or positive about me, or here's things that I like about me, versus here are the things I don't like about me. And if the list I don't like about myself is longer than the list about what I like about myself, I probably need to think about how do I see myself? What's my view? So that's one area that's kind of taking awareness of that. The other thing I think too is with that goes, part of also taking that inventory and raising that awareness is, do my beliefs align with who I really know to be? I think because again, part of it is understanding who I am. And if I don't know what that is, I don't know what those are totally, I can't have a clear picture of those things. I start taking an inventory of like, who do I want to be? Where's my congruency? A lot of times, especially when you're talking about addiction, addiction thrives in contradiction. So anytime there's places in our lives that we're incongruent, probably when we're going to see some of those things pop up. So we kind of want to look at least in this case, we're talking about negative self-talk. We want to look at, okay, well, I say I don't care about myself over here, but then yet I do these other things over here that seem like I can do good self-care or et cetera, whatever. Those are incongruent. So I need to, kind of have those. I need to have my serenity is really all parts of me lining up. So what I say in my mind, what I say comes out of my mouth, and then what my behavior is kind of total serenity. It's all three of those things aligning. The more things that I have incongruent, the more likelihood that I'm probably going to be either struggling with some type of addiction or some type of secrets in my life, or people are going to be seeing a different version of what I really am than behind the scenes. So part of it, I think, is opening up that idea of, can I see myself in congruency? And with that congruency, can I see myself as the person I really know to be?
Let's go back for just a second. You made a comment a couple of minutes ago about forgiveness, and you said forgiveness is not a one-time thing. Forgiveness happens over and over and over again to the people who have hurt us. And I love the fact, because it seems like an unconditional kind of love concept, where it's not that we just accept all kind of bad behavior, but that we keep forgiving over and over again. And I take that over to the clutter corner for a second, where sometimes we clean out our closets and we get rid of stuff, and then lo and behold, it comes back again, and we have to declutter yet again. And I think it is an ongoing process. Can you give us some tips on the ongoing process of removing things from our lives? We'll talk about the clutter as well as the relationships, where we're removing the things that are not healthy for us in a constant state of trying to replace it with something that is healthier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think both from a physical and a relational perspective, the first thing is, am I impulsively bringing these things into my life? So for example, I talk about forgiveness regarding like emotions. If I have somebody who's hurt me and they have said, and I've forgiven them once, okay, well, am I just impulsively kind of going back to that anger? Am I impulsively going back to this space? Well, the differences between collecting and hoarding is collecting has intention, hoarding has impulse. So I think if we're talking about kind of back to the clutter piece, am I allowing myself to be intentional because when I choose forgiveness, I'm being intentional. So that's me being intentional to choose to say, I'm letting it go. And I'm going to not let that be something that's going to, have domain over me, so to speak. The other thing I'm doing with that as well is I'm choosing to, in that intention, to make a different decision than to just be impulsive based on my feelings. Again, feelings are not facts. So when we just feel something, that's very impulsive. So I didn't mention that earlier when we were talking about kind of compulsive behavior. The difference is that after so many times, my impulse becomes my compulse, meaning that I just feel, so we'll use sadness. I feel sad. I'm going to go grab my pint of ice cream. Just as an example, that's a compulsive behavior. I've aligned those two things. And so, kind of do a forgiveness perspective or even like a clutter perspective, if my impulse is to go to the store and I, for wherever it might be, and I say, or go to Amazon, have a little shopping cart on there, and I want to add something on there because, it looks cool, and that adds that, makes me feel good for a little bit. I get the little hit of dopamine. I'm very impulsive. It's not something I'm being very intentional. But if I'm choosing to collect something, I'm going to go online. I'm going to be very particular what I'm looking for. I'm not just going to take the first thing I find on eBay that looks like it's going to be a good fit for me. I'm probably going to spend my time with it. So the same with forgiveness. If forgiveness can't be impulsive. It has to be something I have to choose to do. So I can't. But anger and resentment can be very impulsive because it just feels this way, and this is what I'm going to respond to it. So I think if you think about in that term, how intentional are we being on the things that we're collecting, the things that we're putting in our house, things that we're putting in our heart, things that we're putting in our life. That's a big part of it, because if it's all impulsive, I'm just going to take whatever's available to me. If I'm intentional, I'm going to take what's specific for me to my goal and to who I know to be.
So tell us a little bit about intention. How do we wake up one day and say, wait a second, I am worthy of being intentional of my choices?
I don't know if you wake up and do it. I mean, it'd be nice if we did. I think all of us would probably be happy if we chose just to do that. But yeah, intention is a tough one from the perspective of how to do it, how to practice it. It's something, right? A lot of these things we're talking about, a lot of it's practice. And that's one of the things I think as adults and as human beings, we want things to just be natural. We want things to be organic. And so a lot of the times when we do things that are organic, it's a little bit impulsive at times, especially if they're unhealthy things. But our brains are designed to do the same thing over and over again. And why that's significant is because the things that are healthy or the things that are unhealthy, we choose to, once we start to do them, they become our routine. So, years ago, they did that. There's a documentary where the guy ate McDonald's for 30 days straight. So at day one, he has to be very intentional because he's thinking about going to eat McDonald's. Okay, I'm going to go and go 3 meals a day and get my McDonald's. By day 25, it's impulsive, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that was exactly the way it was, but something similar to that, right? He could just go to McDonald's, doesn't even think about it. Part of that's the brain, again, it streamlines itself in that sense. So practicing intentionality comes from a place of, okay, this is what my impulse or my natural ability to just go and do this comes from. So, okay, so let me just take a moment and how would I do this differently? So you think about this, okay, what choice can I make differently here? So I think about food because it's a pretty easy one for most everyone to relate to. So my impulse is to go home and make a pizza because it's easy, because it's going to be something I can throw in the oven. It's going to take me 20 minutes. I'll be good to go. But if I make my, whatever it might be, right, something I have to cook and I have to write the instructions down, I have to read the recipe and I have to do all those things, that's very intentional. It's very step by step. It breaks up the sort of just organic response. So I think it's important when we're practicing intentionality is that's something that we just every day we could do that. Every day, it doesn't matter what we do, we can choose to practice that. But how are we breaking those steps down? So if we have a goal, what's our goal? If our goal today is to run half a mile. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to we're going to visualize going to put our running shoes on, and we're going to go out the door, and we're going to, maybe start out just walking or jogging, then we running for a little while, and then we just ran half a mile, right? So it's kind of building up to it, like, and how are we putting those choices in front of us in order for us to be able to think about what we're going to do rather than just impulsively respond to it.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because what I hear you saying is if we want different results, we have to do different things. And I know for me, I found myself sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it was just a sheer, doing too much commitment on my plate, being kind of burned out. And I wanted radically different results. And I said to myself, what do I have to do if I want radically different results? Well, the answer is I have to do radically different things. I can't keep doing the same old, hoping for different results. That's just foolishness. Absolutely. And so what can I do? And I mean, I literally flipped the script. I said, what is exactly opposite from what I'm doing right now? Because what I was doing was not working. And I had nothing to lose because what I was doing was not working. So
yeah,
it
absolutely.
it is a moment where you say, wait a second, I am worthy. I deserve a really happy life that's clutter free, that is healthy, that has healthy relationships, that has, it's full of social interaction. And the social interaction I want to stop on for a second, because I get really caught up in my business, and it's easy to say, oh, I don't have time to go to events. And I say no to a lot of activities where friends invite me out and things like that. And there's a woman in my neighborhood who said, I want to get to know you better. I was like, yeah, I don't have time for friends. And she says, I
Yeah.
will meet you at the clubhouse on Saturday morning at 7 o'clock. And let's go walking around the neighborhood because I know you exercise. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And so she went out of her way to be my friend. And I was like, you know what? That's radically different than what I was doing before. So building in with our regular busy schedules and our hectic lifestyles, building in those small changes that will give us radically different results because they're radically different things, right?
Hmm.
Different things than what we're doing. And I just
Absolutely.
joined a gym. I joined a gym, and what I did, it was really interesting because they have like a private, it's like a family locker room, which is normally where I would go just to get away from everyone, just clear my head. And then there's like the social locker room where everyone hangs out. And I forced myself to go to the social locker room, and then I forced myself to learn everybody's names. I know this is really,
Mm.
but it was so different for me because where I'm in a hurry, get out of the pool, run in, change my clothes, and be gone. I force myself now to put my makeup on at the gym and to say hi and to get to know everybody that's there. And what's really interesting is this: it didn't cost me any extra money to make friends. But the one morning that I missed the gym, somebody texted me and said, are you okay? I noticed you weren't at the gym today. And you talk about bringing that wall down. There are little tiny steps that we can make in our life, even if we're not ready to go to a therapist yet, even if we're not ready to look at the darker side of what we've been telling ourselves over and over on those tapes. If we're willing to just lower that fence just a little bit. And for me, it was learning the names of the people at the Y. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like a big thing, but it's a small step in that
Mhm.
direction. And I think if we will start and we will make commitments to ourselves to get radically different results from our lives by doing radically different things, I want to encourage everybody that's on this call or anybody that's watching the replay to start today and to pick a couple elements in your life that could be a beginning of a change. Because what I'm hearing Patrick say today is you don't have to make all the changes today, but you can start
Mhm.
heading in that direction. And I know for me, we talked a little bit about forgiveness. Forgiveness has been very hard for me over my life because I'm a control freak. And I like to say I was right and someone else was wrong, right? Not healthy, but that's who I am. And I
Yeah.
know that I had a sister who married my fiance. And talk about betrayal. I felt so
Mm.
angry and so betrayed. And in my mind, I wanted to forgive her, but I didn't know how. I didn't know what forgiveness was. I didn't know how to do that. And as I was trying to be intentional, I said to myself, what if I could just imagine myself giving her a hug? And I couldn't. I could not picture it to save my life. I could not. And it took years before, and I kept walking myself through it. She's going to walk into the room at a family reunion, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to go over and give her a really honest to goodness hug like I mean it. I could not do it. Every time I would see her at a family reunion, I would get up and I would leave the room and I would go out the other door. I'm like, I do not want to be in the same room as her. Right. I was holding on to that because somehow, if I was in control, that made me strong. No, it does not make me strong. It was bitter and it made me angry and it made me hate myself and her, right? It was not healthy at all. And if
Yeah.
I admit, like what Patrick is telling us today, I admit that I'm worthy of love and I'm worthy of healthy relationships. I have to be willing. Patrick said this earlier at the top of our conversation. You have to be willing to be hurt. People can hurt you again and again and again. And I kept going through this over and over and over in my mind until the moment came where we were at a family reunion and I saw her walk in. I'm like, go for it. Go for it. This is the moment where you get up and you go give her a hug for honest. You mean this, right? And I did. I got up and I went and I gave her a really big hug. And she looked at me like, why did you hug me? I don't deserve this. And she was holding these hard feelings as well. And we had a conversation later. She said, is it possible we could be friends again? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to give it a try. Could she hurt me again? Yes, it's very possible. And she probably will. she's my sister, so she probably will hurt me again, but I'm willing to give it a try. And I love the fact that Patrick came on here today and is giving us some tools where we can give it a try. What do you think?
One of the things that stood out to me, and you mentioned it earlier when you were talking about just the fact of giving a try, and I think basically across the board, if this is true for everybody, right? This is true for all humanity, all human beings. And it's a line from a song by a group called Switchfoot, and it's something that I'll think about a lot when I think about second chances. And the verse of the line is, "Every breath is a second chance." And I think that's really significant when we talk about forgiveness. If you talk about moving forward from pains, whatever it might be, grief. I think that was something we didn't even touch on today, but throughout all this is kind of interwoven. When we choose something, we have to grieve letting the other thing go. And that was something I was going to talk about specifically with like clutter in our lives. Like, we have to let the other things go. I found that to be very profound when I was kind of learning about just this whole program that we're part of here. We have to grieve the things that we're going to let go, things we're not going to choose. So, and a part of that forgiveness is that, we can't try to have, and this is, I think, we're talking about clutter in our lives, we try to have both things at the same time. We all have a relationship with everything in our life, whether it be an item, a person, whatever the choices are, we have a relationship with that thing, so to speak, that choice. And because we choose something else, or if we choose something else, we have to grieve letting that other thing go, whatever that might be. So even something simple like, hey, I'm going to choose Coke over Sprite today at the store. I have to grieve letting go whatever one I didn't choose. But I think on a bigger scale, that's something that we see, when it comes to relationships, or when it comes to we lose a loved one or lose what, and that grief is huge. It's a big part of that, and that can't be something that drives us to kind of drop our anchor, so to speak, and stay there. We have to allow that to be something that's going to move us closer toward the person we want to be. And so I think about another phrase I think about too is turn our wounds into wisdom. And so how do we take the things that have been the pains, the wounds, the hurts, maybe in some cases like you shared, Angela, the lack of, or the struggle of forgiveness, those kind of things. How do we allow those things to become sort of our vision for who we are and who we're going to be the best person that we're going to be? And we're not going to be perfect, but can we live in a state of excellence? Meaning that we're going to be the best person we can be today. We're going to be the best person we can be tomorrow. We'll be the best person after that, And so in those days, or every day might feel like it's a struggle to some degree, but can we get to a part where we're happy with who we are? We see our worthiness, we see our value as a person. And so kind of embracing that even though these things have been hard, they've made us who we are, and they've helped us become the person we like to be.
Well, I love that. I love that because it gives us permission to be human. And I think that's really important distinction. Nobody's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, and we're all human, but we're all, and Patrick just made a really, really interesting point. He said, are you going to drop an anchor and stay stuck there, or are you going to keep moving through? And I think that is really important, because if you are going to get from point A to point B, you have to keep moving through. To drop the anchor and to get stuck and to stay there for forever doesn't make progress. It just leaves you stuck in one space. And I love the fact that life is constantly moving. And Patrick said something earlier about, he didn't use the word domino effect, but what he was talking about was a domino effect. If you do something and it has another effect, which has another effect. And I think it's really important. What dominoes can you pull out of the lineup and tweak those little behaviors or those little frustrations that we have? Or maybe it's a glitch that's made us rise that fence to the point where all you see is our eyes and we feel safe behind our little wall. Is there something we can pull out of that lineup and tweak just a little bit so that it's not starting a domino effect on a journey we don't want to go on? Can we stop the process right now and say, hey, I am worthy. I do deserve something better. And I love the fact that Patrick just said, can we be the best versions of ourselves on this journey through life? And I think that's so important, because life is not a second chance. We get a new second chance every breath, every day, right? It's not something that this is another round. This is it. This is life. This is what we're doing right now. And so to show up every single day and say, hey, is this my best? When I was a little kid, my dad asked us and encouraged us, are you doing something right now? Yes, we are. Can you do it any better? And I loved that, because it really forces me to stop every day and say, hey, what am I doing today? And can I do it any better? And that's what Patrick has shared with us today, is that we deserve that. Oh, I love this conversation, and our time is up. I do want to say hi and thank you to everybody that's jumped in and has left us comments. The Broken Road, thank you so much for your comments. You have given us some certainly food for thought, and I appreciate you joining us here today. Patrick, will you tell our listeners where they can go to find you and your practice?
Yep, absolutely. So the practice website is northpoint-counseling.com. So that is our, you'll see my bio, you'll see the bios of my other colleagues here who specialize, again, sex addiction, partner trauma. That's what we do here. So if you're interested in checking us out, that's where you get from the website there. My personal Instagram is rated_PGE. I don't post a lot of mental health stuff there so much, but I do have some photography that I do kind of as a side hobby that I'd like to do. So there's some things there you can see. I do like to share some stuff I do find from other mental health things. So we're there on that platform. You can reach me. My email is Patrick Eilers, my name, .we, like we, at gmail.com. So that's my personal email. I also have a LinkedIn account. It's just my name and has kind of my credentials and some of the other things I've been part of on there. So those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me if you want to get in touch with me directly.
And I will put links in the show notes to those so that you guys can get in touch with Patrick. But I really appreciate Patrick being willing to have some of those hard conversations with us as we work through our journey of humanity. And we have some of those tough conversations that are those honest conversations that are going to keep us moving from point A to point B in our journey. So thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Angela. Really appreciate it.
We'll see you guys same time, same place next week.